Well, good evening to you and welcome to this program of Walter Rodney Groundings. I'm your host, Dion Abrams, and as promised last week, I have brought again to be on the program this week two commissioners from the Guyana Elections Commission, the Honorable Vincent Alexander and his colleague Desmond Trotman, and we'll be talking again about matters pertaining to elections 2020 here in Guyana. Welcome, gentlemen, to the program.
Thank you, Dion.
But before we get into elections 2020, the WPA has lost a stalwart in the nature of Brother Abiemi Osasi. Osasi was a good comrade. He was an artist. He was a musician. He played the drums. He also played, was it the accordion or the
Clarinet, he played
clarinet?
yeah.
A good brother, very staunch in his beliefs, his philosophical ideas, and sometimes pretty hard to predict and to understand in terms of his thinking, because sometimes your trend of thought might be quite contrary to the positions that he might have taken. But Brother Trotman, you know Brother Osasi pretty well.
Yeah, we worked very closely together over the years. In fact, I came and I met him because I think he was a founder member of the party. He was around that long. Very multi-talented, very committed to the struggle. I think that he, in terms of the struggle where it impacted the democratic process, his contribution was very, very heavy in that direction. I know also that in terms of his interest in working class unity and his defense of women was something to be applauded. And so that I believe that WPA, and not only WPA, the country itself has lost a very staunch soldier. We can speak more about it, about him at another program. He will be buried though on Wednesday. We haven't, the time for the funeral has not yet been agreed, but when that information is ready, we're going to allow people to know. Yeah, we really have lost a very, very staunch soldier in this struggle.
Yeah, well, it will be good if we can have some comrades come one evening to talk about Osasi, so that we can really get to appreciate the man for who he was. I know he was fond of doing portraits of Dr. Rodney. Yeah, even the one that is in the office there. And every time he did one, he'd say, Dion, what do you think about this? Yeah, he was. Yeah, but, good man, a good soldier. So, updates will be given on this.
Dion, I would like to join with you guys to express condolences at this time of Osasi's passing.
Yeah.
I happen to have been acquainted with him in his field because he was a part of the Guyana Suriname Friendship Society.
All right.
And we were involved in doing work both here and in Guyana, and he was integral. So I did come into touch with him and would kind of express the same views you express about the brother. But also like to take the opportunity to shout out condolences to the family of Francis Ferrier.
Oh yes.
Who also passed. And Francis was another person who was a roots man. He was an accomplished sculptor, but he was someone who grounded with the brothers and therefore was deeply involved with the brothers on Main Street, keeping them in that body of people who were producing their works. He also did work at the university. So I think recognition is also due to him, and he passed rather suddenly. And as you just said, we should also note the passing of another iconic personality in the person of George Simon. George Simon, who did significant work in Guyana, both as an artist, but he also did work in the area of anthropology and archaeology. Archaeology. In a sense, I think he carried on from the work of Dennis Williams in archaeology, and he too has passed. So we've had a significant cultural figures who have passed since we last met, and I think we should take the opportunity on our own behalf and on behalf of the organizations we represent to express condolences to these fallen heroes, cultural icons.
Good gentlemen. The elections of 2020, the matter is before the court, but the question is, last week you spoke about, the dynamics that would have resulted in the racial differences, the colonialism and its impact on race and politics in Guyana. And then we look briefly at the current political situation and elections 2020. But I mean, for these elections, how is it that we actually got where we are at this moment?
Since we last met here, I noticed one initiative in the media. I'm trying to remember the brother's name, who has attempted also to do analysis of where we're at and how we got to where we're at. And who has looked at it from the perspective of the ethnic configuration and the ethnic conflict and is associated. He thinks that the real issue has to do with the political competition, and specified the two political parties as being the competitors, and that what is required if we are to move away from this, in his view, I'm trying to remember the brother's name, is to find a way for these political parties really to be multi-ethnic on one hand, but he also thinks that the electoral system should allow for a more liberal approach to candidates rather than the list approach, which we presently confronted with, and he feels that that will go a long way to solve the problem. So there are Guyanese out there who have recognized the problem, because I think that's one of the first issues you have to confront, acceptance of the problem. And what his brother did, though I might not agree with his approach to the problem, he's accepted that there is this problem that needs to be resolved. And I think the conversation has to be continuing about this problem, because irrespective of what happens with these elections, that problem will persist and needs to be solved, or else we're going to go back to another election some other time with the same problem, with the same issues. So the question then is, how did we get to where we're at in terms of the election specifically, rather than the broader issue of the kind of societal problem that we have. Of course, this in some regard started with the no confidence motion. Started there. And I think the no confidence motion signaled the level of moral decay that we have suffered, and that much of that has continued in terms of our conduct during the elections. So I think a critical issue is the moral decay, because for me it is still an immoral act for someone to be a candidate on a list that people voted for in a majority. You are not an individual candidate with your own constituency. You are on this list, and to use your presence on that list, I'd call you a guest, to bring down that list, I think is a rather immoral act. People may argue that the law provides for it and all of that, but I think it's a sad state of immorality that you could sit among people and they could virtually ask you what's your disposition to these matters, and you condemn, and then claim the legal right to go to the parliament and destroy that list altogether. And I think that's really a problem. That's one of our problems that has followed us all through these elections. I said it has followed us all through these elections because the second issue that we were faced with is the issue of national registration. And again, the morality question loomed large. All of the political parties from 2015 had agreed, and even before, that we'd have periodic national registration. Everybody agreed to that. And the understanding was that you need to clean up the list. We had a situation where for 2 to 3 years the government did not make the money available for national registration. That's the reality. In the 2018 budget, the budget which was passed in 2018, for 2019, the money was made available. And so GCOM sought to embark on this exercise in 2019. But it sought to embark on the exercise after the Force Immoral Act and the call for immediate elections. And that's a legal question. And the people who had all agreed that we should have this registration suddenly thought that no, there is no need for registration, to the point that they took the matter to court. So it shows you the crisis our society is in that we do not have a leadership who we can rely on in terms of their commitment to anything. Everything seems to be a matter of opportunity and opportunism. You know, what is beneficial at a particular point in time to a particular group of people rather than what is good for the nation. And so we entered into the elections starting off with the national registration, which process was then aborted because of what the court ruled. And I must say the court has ruled, but in my honest view, I think that the court made a serious error in its ruling that we have no right to take people's name off of the list.
But before you go there, that matter wasn't pursued any further. Why was it allowed to?
I think it's a question of being into the process of elections, and people not wanting to be found to be trying to hem and haw and to stymie that process. But certainly it is, in my view, it was a very, very bad judgment. It's not a judgment that took into consideration the realities. You see, I feel that there are different schools of jurisprudence. And I felt that the judge became a traditional, a positivist, the letter of the law, and in no way considered the entire sociological element of the law, and which is another school of jurisprudence in the decision which was made. So, you know, the judge made a decision based on whatever would be the jurisprudential influences that she fell under. So I'm not knocking the judge, but I'm saying at the end of the day, for Guyana, it was a bad decision, because undoubtedly, if you have a list of if you have a population of 750,000 people, and your school records show that your under 18 population is between 200,000 to 250,000, the question is, how can you arrive at an electoral list of over 61,000? And you have a lot of guys out there who are trying to argue the case. It can't be argued. It's statistically, logically, can't be argued. You just cannot have a voting population of 661,000 people from an actual population of 750 or thereabout thousand persons, when your school population, your under 18 population, is around 200,000. So that, to me, immorality in the first instance, and the perpetuating the immorality which allowed for that case to go forward, became the platform upon which we have all of these problems now that have arisen out of the elections, problems that we could have avoided. So we went into the elections with what I would contend is, and the facts of the matter have kind of vindicated this, a bloated list. A bloated list at a time of political rivalry that suggests that the immorality which I talk about could take on even the greater form of illegality in terms of how we treat the elections. And so we went to the elections with that great possibility of the bloated list being misused, of illegal acts being carried out in pursuit of victory, in a scenario we have established already that the society seems to have no moral bearing whatsoever. People just do what they think is in their interest.
But the commission had begun a registration process.
Yeah, the commission began the process, but in the course of the process, the judge ruled.
Yeah.
And what the chairman did was to bar the process. That is neither here nor there, because the fact of the matter is that what the judge ruled was that we couldn't take anyone's name off of the list. And so at the end of the day, irrespective of what the chairman did, we were going to proceed with that bloated list. So we went to the elections with the bloated list, and I think there were things to be observed. One of my own observations on election day was I traversed the East Coast, and one of my observations was a number of people who I saw were voting with oath of identity rather than ID cards. I found this strange. It was an unusual number, it's phenomenal, and given the fact that GCOM had been publishing the names of people whose ID cards had not been uplifted and all of that, I found it strange that you would have so many people coming forward to vote without ID cards, using oath of identity. And we ended up with a problem where at the election day, the record now shows that some people didn't even have the oath of identity.
Yeah, but we had to rush off to Strathspey, the Strathspey Primary School, because there was a house obliquely opposite where guys were just coming out of the election booth, walking straight across the road, change a jersey, and they were heading back across the road and a group of Oxonians had to go there and put a halt to that process.
But Strathspey seems to be a mountain post, because I do recall in 2006, it was Strathspey was the place where the agent determined that in fact there was substitute voting taking place. Yeah. And that was brought to the attention of one Mr. Bulu, who in his usual style promised to look into the matter and did nothing about it. So Strathspey seems to be one of the main staging places for substitute voting on the East Coast. So that voted list provided for that, and I saw that phenomenon emerging on the day in question. We then had a count. The day was generally peaceful. We then had a count that seemed to have gone pretty okay. And then we came to the tabulation. And we had the tabulation in 10 districts. I want to make a comment here about the question of observers. There's been comments about observers, particularly Carricham and the 18%. The comment I want to make is this, that in the main, what observers do is to see if your process is working. So they come, they find out what your process is, and then on election day, they go see if your process is working. The observers are not able, by virtue of the number, to give more than that 18% coverage even on election day. They're not able to give more than that 18% coverage on election day. So that it's called a best practice, but that best practice cannot validate the process the operationalization of the process on election day, because they do not see more than a small percentage of what occurs. And anybody who wants to do wickedness wouldn't do it when observers are there. So we appreciate the role of observers. We appreciate that in the first instance they say you have a good process. Of course our process was flawed from the inception because of the list, and therefore it couldn't be that good. But that they cannot, on election day, give 100% coverage. And in fact, I'm saying that the coverage is somewhere in the vicinity of that 18% you heard about in relation to the Caricom people. And so we can't go putting our head in the block. Some people putting their head in the block with all of these observers. I'm not criticizing the observers. I'm saying from a statistical perspective, you cannot, and particularly in our circumstances, all things being equal, observers can give you, but all things are not equal in Guyana. All things are not equal. So we had observers, and we came to the point of the tabulation. I can't speak to what happened in 9 out of 10 districts with the tabulation. I can't speak to that. I don't know how many observers are present. I can't speak to it. And generally, we at GCOM do not speak to the 10 tabulations. That is not what the central administration is engaged in. You have returning officers who are sworn to deal with those districts, and they have responsibility for those districts. We saw that there was a coincident of location between the region 10 district 4 and the
observer missions.
and the command center for
command
elections.
Okay.
In my own view, the whole operational command center, which happened to be where Region 4 was as well, was badly handled. Badly handled. And GCOM has to be introspective and retrospective about that, what happened. Because it became a place where apparently Tom, Dick, and Harry could have assembled. And Tom, Dick, and Harry, in the name of what they call democracy and transparency and all kind of things, could run upstairs and break down a door, say they're going to come save the chairperson. I haven't heard the chairperson say anything about that subsequently. But that was the kind of environment that you had. And in that environment, from day one, even before the Region 4 Conk started, the protest started. Before the Conk started, there were issues. Those issues saw the intervention of the CEO. CEO not responsible for Region 4, okay. District 4. Saw his intervention, there were some agreements about how they would proceed. He withdrew again, because it's not his exercise. And no sooner had he withdrawn, the protest started again. And so District 4 was doomed for problems from the very inception. We then saw that those problems led to court action, where the court said, look, we cannot intervene in the substantive matter of the elections. We can take up the role of a supervisory role in relation to process. And all that we can say is that if he has not followed the process, he should follow the process. And I think it's at that point that the chairman gave an undertaking of him following the process. And there was some issue about a recount as a part of following the process. And it's important we note that, because lots of people are now confusing the chairman's recount issue with the recount that took place at the convention center. They're not the same things. So my understanding is that after the court ruled, they went back to GCOM and sought to adhere to the rule of the court. And then there was an attempt at a declaration which led to them going back to the court, again on the question of content. And I think it's at that point really the chairman intervened and said, look, I will have this matter settled. What I saw was they came back and they changed the process in the first instance at Ashman, and then literally changed the venue to High Street, and the counting continued and a declaration was made. So that became the 10th declaration. So there were 10 declarations. There were a number of calls for recount. Region 6, Region 5,
Region 3,
Region 4, Region 3,
Region 2.
Region 2. Clearly the recounts in Region 4, 3, 4-3 were not granted. Were not granted. The recount in Region 6 started, and there were some technical problems. It was aborted. The recount in Region 4 was not granted. I don't recall Region 2 what happened, but the recount did not take place in Region 2. So you had a situation where there was a call for plethora of recounts. Some were started and aborted. Some were put in abeyance, and some were not granted. Now, the Region 4 thing by then had flared up, and against the background of Region 4 flaring up, the President and the leader of the opposition agreed to recount. At that time, the chairman made it clear that whatever she had said to the court about the recount had been overtaken by the agreement between the President and the leader of the opposition. So the recount that they had agreed to had overtaken and was not the recount that she had promised. And her position was that having gone to the court and made a promise, that on one hand she couldn't make a declaration, she couldn't accept those declarations because she had not gone back to the court for the so-called contempt to be dismissed, so that was hanging over her head. And at the same time, there was now a new process that overtook that process, and therefore we proceed with the new process. That new process clearly entailed, in the first instance, the involvement of CARICOM as the supervisors. That went to court. The court ruled that GCOM could not give up its function to CARICOM, and therefore that first recount was squashed. We then did what is called a GCOM supervised recount. A GCOM supervised recount. And in that recount we crafted an order.
Order 60.
Order 60. Order 60, which provided unequivocally for, on one hand, a recount, but on the other hand, for some processes that are not peculiar to a recount as is provided for under the Representation of the People's Act. And that's important to note, because now that the recount has become a question of contestation, people are trying to move it back
to the original
RUPO, and so to avoid what was in it. And so we have a big situation now where they're saying, look, the order is legal, but the order is not legal because much of what's in the order is not being absorbed.
It's throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Not being absorbed. And the issue of these things being post-electoral and petition and all of that have arisen. But the fact of the matter is the order provided for, and I would find it strange for intelligent people to sit down and craft an order and then to turn around and say that it's not their intention to use that order in the manner in which they crafted it. I find it strange. So there may be another issue of immorality in relation to the order. Because the order was a document discussed repeatedly and finally approved by GCOM. And it informed the exercise we were going to be engaged in and the exercise we actually engaged in. But lo and behold, we came to the point where when the exercise is concluded, the argument is that those things cannot be taken into consideration because those things are for Article 163. So that we are pack of jokers. That's what we made ourselves into.
And Article 63 is for the elections code.
For the elections code. We made ourselves into a pack of jokers because we worked out the process, and much of the time we took was because of that process. And then there are those of us who were saying, well, we did it, but, made ourselves jokers. So,
but let me intervene here, Vincent, because I won't touch on anything that Vincent said before, except in relation to the process that we work on. It is instructive to note when Vincent said that we did this over time. We sat down. People made proposals. We discussed those proposals. There was agreement. Those people who made the proposal said, look, give us some time to clarify these concerns. So they went back to their principles and they got clarity. And then they came back. And we discussed what they were asking to be clarified. And we agreed. And then they asked for more time. And they went back again. And then they came back. And that was the process that Vincent referred to when he said that it took some time. It took a lot of time because every time we struck an agreement on the way forward, there was always a need for those persons to go back and to ensure that in the final analysis
was what they wanted.
Was what they wanted. And now it is that we arrive at the point where we have to have agreement on the final outcome. They're saying, no, it's a violation of it.
So this, one could probably see this as a setup in some regards. If not, I said we made a joke of ourselves. But this may have been a premeditated course of action, for all you know. But it underlines the point I'm making about the state of the nation. A nation that has absolutely no moral bearing. A nation where, we consider politics to be the act of gamesmanship, who could outsmart, outmaneuver, and things like that. And wherever it takes us, that's it. So we come to the point now of a numerical count with observations. Which observations have, people are trying to say these observations are not verified. We unequivocally verified in the recount process, unequivocally, that there were persons who voted ostensibly as employees but did not have the certificates of employment. When you are voting in a place other than where you are entitled to vote, you must be an employee of GCOM and you must present a certificate of employment as the basis for casting that vote. We have hundreds of people who didn't have those certificates, but they cast the vote. And those votes are votes that have been counted. We have the other situation, again, hundreds of people who didn't have ID cards, who should have signed up certificates of oaths of identity, who did not do so, and the votes have been counted. The votes have been counted. And we came to the point of saying that that is not a problem. That all of those issues are post-election issues. Not to mention the fact that there is evidence presented to GCOM of people who died who voted, and there is evidence. The jokers out there trying to tell the public there is no evidence. There is unrefutable, irrefutable evidence in that regard of people who died. We have seen some people come on a television station and say something about
I'm alive.
I'm alive and all of that. Those people have not attempted to go to the authorities responsible for this process to say they're alive. That's a propaganda show. We also have evidence of people who were migrated and who are ostensibly voted for. Right? Now, all of this is being said to be things that are now to be considered post-electoral. And the legal people are arguing and they're bringing their cases and so. And so they're saying those are things for a petition. The fact of the matter is that we have to accept, petition or no petition, that our elections was terribly flawed because of all of the things that I've just mentioned, including the fact that in 47 boxes, representing some over 11,000 votes, there were no records, so that one cannot verify if it is the eligible voters whose votes were cast. You can't. It's not verifiable. There is no OLE there in the box. There is no stub showing that these ballots were extracted from the relevant ballot books. There is absolutely nothing. So you can verify. I have no doubt people voted there. But you can verify that these ballots represent in their totality the ballots of the people who are entitled to vote.
And those votes were counted?
They're counted. They're counted over 11,000 votes.
And they're counted over the objections of 3 commissioners in the commission.
They were first put aside.
They were first set aside.
They were set aside.
And then they were set aside
for
to allow an investigation to take place. And before that investigation was completed, the chair took a decision to proceed to have those.
I wouldn't say the chair took a decision.
To be tabulated.
I would say the commission took a decision, including the vote of the chair.
Okay.
So it's 4 commissioners who have to take responsibility for that. Of course, the chair could have made it otherwise by not, but I wouldn't single her out in the sense that there's 4 commissioners, the chair being one, who took that position. But her vote is critical because the House was divided. The House was divided. And so we have...
Why are you always defending this chair?
I haven't defended the chair.
All intransigencies that we have seen, from the beginning, the inception, the stopping of the House registration, all of everything that the PPP campaigned for during these elections, they got because of the vote of the chair, and you all still continue to. I
don't defend the chair. My position is one of stating the facts.
Okay, all right.
Let the people out there make their determination.
The chair has shown a clear bias in relation to the PPP.
The question
from
of
all
bias
of our actions.
is a question of judgment. I may have my view on that matter, but I feel as a commissioner my obligation is to bring to the attention of the public the facts. Let the public be the judge.
Well, I'm a judge here.
Right, well, you're free to do that.
Right. I'm saying that the chair has established a pattern of bias in favor of the PPP in every aspect of the process in relation to these elections, and we can't run away from that fact.
Well, as Vincent said, you're entitled to your own opinion of these matters.
You can't run away from the fact that in most instances, and I say most because it's not all, but in most instances, and in critical matters, her vote corresponded with that of the PPP commissioners. That's a fact, and I have no problem with the fact. But I'm not going to accuse her of bias or, That's the fact. The fact is she voted with them.
But let me clarify, Dion. My position in relation to when I said that she made the decision, I thought that in the face of an incomplete investigation, because when the investigation started, the number of ballot boxes that were under question were 22, and then it went to 47. Now, in the face of that, because I remember arguing that something had to be wrong with those persons who were sworn to carry out a certain function and who were trained to carry out that function in what I believe was a very effective manner. Why it is that some persons in the same corridor did absolutely everything that was correct and some didn't. And so that you needed a very thorough investigation to find out what happened. The GCOM could have ensured that that investigation took place. The chair was committed to that investigation, then retreated. And in that manner, I believe that she made a mistake. She made a serious mistake. And so that when I said that, she ruled, but it was her decision, I really do believe that she had the power at her disposal to ensure that the investigation, which will have clarified what happened, should have taken place.
All right.
The manner of the constitution of the commission, and it's something we have to look at, allows the chairperson singularly to make decisions. That's the reality we face with. The manner of the constitution allows the chairperson singularly to make decisions. And unfortunately, there are decisions which are made which one cannot necessarily agree with because of one's understanding as to what was and what should be as opposed to what eventuated. So, for example, we did not, as a commission, pay sufficient attention during the course of the recount to the evidence that was with us on the dead and the evidence that was with us on the migrants. To the extent that at a meeting recently, the PVP commissioners attempted to say that there were no death certificates. And the chairman had no choice but to indicate indeed they were death certificates. But they came ex post facto saying there were none. But in fact, GCOM had possession of death certificates. So that the morality question is a burning issue throughout the entire process. People have become strangers to the truth. Strangers to the truth. And so for that reason, we need to let the truth unfold, even as there are legal decisions which may not support the evidence that's before the nation in these matters. And so we got to the point of declaration. And I'm going to raise the most contentious issue here. There were 10 declarations.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to go to that point.
There was some contention about declarations. There was the most contention about Region 4 declaration. But in the context of GCOM's operation, we got to the point where there were 10 declarations that have not been questioned in law.
And twice, Region 4 was declared twice.
Well, yes, it was declared twice.
Okay, all right.
The first one could say was questioned.
Yeah.
The first declaration. But the ultimate declaration was not questioned in law. So we have 10. Now, in the normal circumstances, those are the declarations which could be used to declare. We had, however, said we put those in abeyance because of all this contestation, to do the recount. We knew what we wanted in terms of the recount. Given what evolved in terms of the recount, which didn't reflect what we wanted, then from a logical perspective, what one had to fall back on was those 10 uncontested declarations. That's what one had to fall back on. The 10 uncontested declarations. My own disposition was, look, you have those declarations, you have a recount, you found all these problems. So it means that these problems here are also germane to the votes under those 10 declarations. And therefore, let's not declare. Let's not declare. But from a pure legal perspective, even with the knowledge of those problems, those 10 declarations remain on the table. But we have sought, in the face of that, to find a way, on one hand, to castigate the recount, but on the other hand, to use the numerics of the recount to determine the results. Which numerics, I maintained, are contaminated. And there are those who now argue, well, they may be contaminated, but it's for a petition.
Yeah, but all right, you went to we don't want to rush, but petition. Now the matter before the court is the question of whether the petition should have come at the point of the Region 4 declaration or...
No,
because the basis, because the argument is that, right? In essence, that those declarations are the legal declarations, right? That
well, I get the point you're making. Right. The point you're making is this: that from a purely legal perspective, what should now happen is that those declarations should be subject to a petition after the declarations would have been made. But rather than that, what we're doing, we are doing the declarations on the recount. And then the recount and everything else will be could be subject to petition. A recount, the result of which is different to the 10 declaration. So there's clear maneuvering and manipulation of the process to determine who will be the petitioner. Because it is clear in our circumstances that one way or the other you're going to have petitioners. That's the reality we face with. That one way or the other you're going to have petitioners on this election. And we as a nation do not have the fortitude and the foresight to see that we got real problems. And the real problems should not be solved by anything called a petition. They should be solved by the political directorate sitting down and saying, look, we got real problems. The real problems are what we referred to last week in terms of the ethnic conflict and so the society has, and that these real problems have been manifest in our elections, not now, prior to now, and that this is probably the time for us to pull back and look at the situation to find a real solution so we do not have a continuation of this kind of electoral problem period after period.
Dion, I wanted to say something. I want to say something. From the and people should know. From the time we began to discuss the whole question of how it is we'll approach the elections and the arguments and consider the arguments for and against the new registration exercise, which, as Vincent said, we had all agreed on. But there came a point in time when what was put forward was the need for us not to go in the direction of the required registration exercise. From the time that position was posited, it became clear to me, and I think to both the Commissioners Alexander and Corbyn, that if we proceeded in that direction to go into an election with a list that is bloated, that what will eventuate is what we have before us today. Now, the one thing about the recount exercise is that was shown that differed from what happened when the votes were counted immediately after the elections were the numbers of anomalies that were present in the system. Because let's take, for example, the absence of the statutory documents in those 47 ballot boxes. No one knew about them. The declaration would have been made, and you will not have known about that. But when it is that the recount exercise took place, all of those things became manifested and couldn't be denied. The existence of them were manifested, they couldn't be denied. But I'm saying that even before we got to the point of holding the elections, the three of us were apprehensive about what will eventuate at the end of the elections. We were very apprehensive. And so that we warned about the importance of having the kind of list that will throw up a conclusion to the elections that will be accepted. I wanted to make that point because we have a situation now in which it is we heading to a fiasco. I believe we head into a fiasco.
We're sitting on a powder keg.
We're sitting there precisely.
But nobody seems to be caring.
Nobody cares about that.
But anyway, that's going to take a whole discussion. That may come after the decision of the Honorable Chief Justice. But the Chief Parliamentary Officer had warned that this recount process was, ultra-virus and all of these things. And then we went into it with Order 60. And now they're arguing that, Order 60 really is not legal. Now people are saying that it is legal, as you were saying.
Well, the argument, and tomorrow we will get a final word in a sense. The argument is that the CCJ said it's legal.
Right.
So tomorrow we get a final word on whether it's legal or it is not legal. But my position is that, put all these legalities aside, that what has affected us is a high level of immorality. And immorality breeds illegality, right? A high level of immorality, starting with the NCM, which is the mother of all immorality, and coming right through. And so if we don't fix our, it is argued from a standpoint of morality that morality is not the law, and therefore you don't have one moral code in society. Society can have different moral codes. But the fact of the matter is that when it comes to certain issues, they are not sectoral issues, they are national issues. And therefore we have to have national values that inform those issues. We cannot rely on each group imposing their value on the system.
And supported by...
And that is the problem. That is where the immorality comes in, because it is different moral codes being used, but different moral codes being used by different groups to drive what is not peculiar to the group. It's something for the nation at large. And therefore, it is a reflection of the problem which is initially referred to. That is the conflict we have between the groups, because they bring to bear their own morality on our processes.
No, I've heard, because the time is on us, but I've listened to, I can't remember his name, Siraj or some of the guys who were involved in the recount.
Darren Clark, Siraj.
Right, Darren Clark. And he was saying that even during the recount process, there was no kind of methodology being applied to many of the decisions, because you made a decision in relation to one thing today, and then on another day
there was a big word people use, transparency. If they understand the word they use, one of the flaws of the recount was transparency, in the sense that at different times different standards were applied to the same circumstance. So we were in breach of transparency, notwithstanding that the CCJ said it was a transparent exercise. They said that, and I'm bold to say, in ignorance. because when we were counting the votes, there was one time we used one standard to determine reject, another time another standard, another time another standard. You cannot argue transparency in those circumstances. That is intransparent.
So the nation waits with bated breath, and we who know the possibilities are here sitting with a great concern, because we know that at any point, and the argument is, that those who are so integrally involved in pushing this agenda, which is basically a foreign agenda, pushed by local people, that they are part of a process that not only would have occurred in Guyana, where nations would have been totally destroyed, pushing an agenda from those countries like the United States and Europe and so on. Because we have seen countries disintegrated into total chaos. And that warning coming from it's not Senegal, it's West South Sudan. One of the leaders of one of those countries, where she said that their country was for 11 odd years in total turmoil, where people were basically at each other's throats. And that is basically where we're heading, But people don't seem to care, and they don't seem to understand it. But the question next week, we can discuss I don't know what the decision will be, but does the court have the jurisdiction to annul these elections?
Well,
and to say, well, party, look, people sit down.
I think the response will be that the court has the jurisdiction to do it in a petition. I think that's what the response will be.
Okay.
My own disposition is that if you are able to identify, it is not normal to identify these problems in the course of an election. And that since you were able to identify them in the course of an election, then it should not be taken action after under the petition. That under the order we had, we could have taken action in the course rather than wait after. I think it's illogical. The lawyers will argue that, well, the petition has a certain jurisdiction it is responsible for. I have my own views on the matter.
You're not a lawyer.
No, not a lawyer.
But Dion, you raised the question of annulment of the elections. There's a single case in one of these African states. I can't remember.
Malawi, I think.
Malawi, I think. Might not have been.
It's the same.
Where a decision was actually taken
and they
by
had
the election
1 year after.
To actually annul the election. It was a step which was thought to be
retrograde,
controversial, but it was a step taken by that electoral body because it felt it was a step that was required in order to have stability in society. You talked just now about people seeming not to care. It is true that what's happening here is that the thing is about power at all costs. And even if it is that you get power, that power is given to you as surrogates of an imperial power that you prepare to accept power under those conditions. And so that is the situation that we have before us today.
All right, gentlemen, I want to thank you again for coming here and to talk about these elections. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, and then the next day, and the next day, and the next day, and the next day. But we're hopeful that something happens that would save the nation, right, from going down the road this perilous road that it's heading towards, and that some good sense will prevail by those who have the power to bring it back, so that they can do just that. All right. You folks out there, I want to thank you. I want to thank you two gentlemen, first of all, for being here again. And I want to thank the public out there for tuning into the Rodney Groundings. And I do hope that you have a blessed night. And see you next week, same time, same channel, and we'll have another program of Walter Rodney Groundings.